Hi, this is Anna London with Divergence, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about issues on the front lines of technology and politics. Okay. Global political trends in recent years have put to rest any illusions that the relationship between technological innovation and progress and democratic politics would largely be positive. Digital technology is disrupting international politics in a myriad of ways. Okay. So to start, it is bringing new dimensions to the authoritarian playbook, enabling governments to easily manipulate information consumed by citizens and to monitor dissent and track political opponents and to censor communications, right? Democracies, meanwhile, struggle to strike the right balance between rewarding economic innovation and reaping the financial benefits of big tech, while protecting user privacy, guarding against surveillance, misuses, and countering disinformation and hate speech. Back in COVID, time, that crisis had intensified these tensions. Governments have, of course, seized upon the pandemic as an excuse to introduce a new wave of restrictions, emergency decrees that prohibit public gatherings, measures that censor online speech, and directives that affect user privacy. Remember, we just came out of that. But those outliers, those effects are still here, and we're seeing it in the technological and legislation, right, imposed on people across the world. In the United States, those states that have deployed new applications to counter the spread of the COVID disease, right, or any disease for that matter, rolling out contact tracing apps, remember those, facial recognition systems, and digital health passports, right, for some countries that actually went through it. But some of those technologies represented legitimate attempts to control the virus, but many measures had lacked the basic safeguards to protect data privacy. Right? Certain governments, use that data collected from the public health interventions to pursue, a myriad of unrelated law enforcement activities. And it's unclear whether those states will even ever retract those restrictions, right? After the pandemic, right? Most of them are here to stay, unfortunately. A lot of people, I think it was more like a test to see what we'd allow and what we'd not allow, right? As the United States influences, have decreased and emerging in the states, particularly China, increased their power, the global online commons is fraying. And experts once divided internet governance into democratic and authoritative domains is here to stay, unfortunately. On one side stood the United States and its allies, which advanced a model centered around an open, interoperable, reliable, and secure internet at one point that used to prioritize individual freedom of action, liberal values, and minimal government interference. On the other side, though, stands a smaller group of countries like China, Russia, and Iran, for instance, which offer an alternative model premised on information security, but maintaining that a country's sovereign interests should dictate which rules apply. So despite insistence by, the U.S., the world remains divided between techno-democracies and techno-autocracies. And a more accurate description would be fragmentation, right? Because increasingly, the world is splintering into national or regional internets governed by different norms and rules and incorporating democratic and authoritarian characteristics. In 2021 alone, a slew of countries, many of them democratic, had adopted restrictive digital regulations more at home in authoritarian states. So Nigeria had banned Twitter from operating in the country, and the reason was that Twitter had removed a tweet from President Muhammadu Buhari that the company had claimed violated its community guidelines. In response, the government accused Twitter of undermining Nigeria's corporate existence and outlawed the service. Meanwhile, in India, the government decreed that all online media outlets and video content providers were required to appoint local representatives to respond to every government complaint within 15 days. And that law also authorized state officials to censure or delete content that crossed certain lines. And several months later, Prime Minister Narendra Modi became so incensed after Twitter labeled a post from his rulings, the Bharatiya Janata Party, manipulated media that he authorized a special forces raid on the company's offices. Similarly, the governments of Turkey, Uganda, the Philippines, and Indonesia have cherry-picked regulatory approaches to create distinctive local versions of the internet, whether incorporating social media taxes and localization requirements or enacting burdensome content restrictions. And more recently, of course, Russian authorities have refined a new tactic, demanding the Apple and Google remove programs from their app stores linked to opposition leaders ahead of Duma elections. These trends are causing growing concerns, about how technology, politics, and the state authority will and has evolved. Can democracies strike an appropriate balance between safeguarding their societies from dangerously polarizing online rhetoric while maintaining commitments to protecting free expression? Can democratic leaders, for instance, reach consensus about how to address core policy problems such as establishing coherent rules about personal data protection and privacy, devising guidelines for the responsible use of emerging technologies like facial recognition or even AI, right? And finally, reining in on big tech's excessive market and surveillance power. What will China's influence on technology and data governance be? And will its efforts to rewrite cyber norms allow digital authoritarian approaches to gain ground? Can civic activists, independent journalists, and human rights advocates and continue to find innovative ways to push back against government repression using new tools, tactics, and technologies? The answers to these questions are not foretold. All of them represent major areas of contestation, right? And consternation. While policymakers seek resolutions to these pressing questions, they can, however, benefit from the ground level insights of experts, scholars, researchers, and activists. Okay, so, there's different diverse groups of cutting edge thinker activists that are engaged in work on technology and politics, right? But a lot of them are ideological and biased. Okay, different networks do aim to facilitate cross-regional knowledge sharing, support collaborative strategies to pressing problems, and investigate previously unknown and emerging questions in the field. Okay, so first, let's focus on the COVID-19 pandemic, okay, and evaluate the national and regional responses to the disease when it occurred, right? We're doing the after-action review here. Experts are definitely divided about the long-term political consequences of the pandemic, right? And even though, like I said, the COVID, pandemic is pretty much ended, if you will, the effects are clearly felt across the world. Okay, groups such as Freedom House, International IDEA, and International Center for Nonprofit Law document how surveillance overreach, data and privacy vulnerabilities, media suppression, content restrictions, and emergency decrees have challenged democratic institutions and undermined civil liberties. The ICNL, right, the International Center for Nonprofit Law, for example, reported that via the COVID-19 Civic Freedom Tracker, right, that through September 2021, right, 109 countries had issued emergency declarations. 57 had instituted measures that impacted freedom of expression. 150 had implemented restrictions on freedom of assembly, and 60 had enacted restrictions on privacy. Other organizations painted a less grim picture. Researchers from the Variety of Democracy Project wrote that the COVID-19 pandemic had registered several wins and losses for democratic standards. And while high-income Western democracies have generally performed quite well, several low and lower middle-income countries stand out for their innovation and advances. And they noted that the most serious democratic violations had tended to occur at the beginning stages of the pandemic, and that the number of restrictions had declined over time. And they observed that courts had pushed back successfully against overreach by executive branches, and that certain countries have managed to avoid discrimination while establishing safe COVID-19 protocols, and that a number of states had successfully countered public health misinformation while avoiding broader media restrictions. But even if certain countries were witnessing recent governance improvements, several concerning trends stand out. Okay, so, in countries already prone to repression, the pandemic had given greater license to governments to enact additional restrictions on citizens' liberties. Countries like China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, and Turkey, have all pursued a mix of new surveillance technologies and legal directives that have significantly constrained freedom of association and expression. Governments have also used the threat of disinformation as a pretext to persecute under fake news statutes, right? Scores of individuals, many of whom happen to be civil society activists and political opposition figures, while at the same time, these governments have expanded their own public health disinformation efforts. Okay, state disinformation follows one of three guidelines, basically. The denialist, the governments discredit or deny reports of outbreaks in their countries. The anti-science folks, which, authorities basically minimize COVID-19 dangers while rejecting accepted medical recommendations. And the curist. Those, of course, that group of leaders promoted unfounded treatments for the virus, such as Brazil's president, Jair Bolsonaro's endorsement of hydroxychloroquine, right? But many of these scents have then been proven to be okay. So there's just been a lot of disinformation around the world. Members of the Digital Democracy Network offered their own perspectives about the meaning and import of the COVID-19 pandemic. And Janhira Sambat Punsiri, affiliated with Chulalongkorn University and the German Institute for Global and Area Studies, and of course Sangeeta Mahapatra, also with the GIGA, right, the Global and Area Studies, provided a case study analysis of the COVID-19 restrictions in Southeast Asia. Okay. Gbindis Hassan, executive director of Nigeria's Paradigm Initiative, turned his eye to sub-Saharan Africa, where he found a similar pattern of COVID-19 related digital abuses occurring in Kenya, Nigeria, and Zambia. Irene Potranto and Lotus Ruan, researchers, of course, affiliated with the University of Toronto Citizen Lab, presented a global overview of new technologies adopted in response to the pandemic. And they examined the cost of countries' growing reliance on advanced digital tools in public health and where this reliance might lead. Okay, network members described how authoritarian regimes were employing new technologies to strengthen their rule in counter opposition and civic challenges, okay, because this bled over to everyday life. An expanding set of countries are now relying on facial recognition technology, big data analytics, and predictive policing techniques and safe city systems to enhance their security capabilities, okay, and surveillance of their people. The latest data from the Digital Society Project, updated to include 2020 statistics at that time, continued to show a close relationship between authoritarian regimes, constraints on political freedoms, and corresponding government reliance on digital repression techniques. Okay. Countries with a greater prevalence of surveillance, censorship, internet shutdowns, and disinformation include authoritarian stalwarts like China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, members of the Gulf Cooperation Council, and countries in Central Asia and the Horn of Africa. Conversely, Europe and the Americas display reduced levels of digital repression. However, that has since been increasing, right? And we need to take heed to that because, the U.S. Constitution, right? And of course, if you call yourself a constitutionalist, then you're seen to be right-wing, or I'm not sure why, right? Wouldn't every U.S. citizen want to be constitutionalist? Shouldn't you know your rights, right? I'm just saying. The analysis, explores, okay, different aspects of repression trends, okay? So for instance, why do states choose to adopt advanced technologies from authoritarian sources? What technological methods are Gulf states using to enact their political agendas? What can civil society make of the growth of internet shutdowns and social media blockages around the world? How are, for instance, Myanmar's armed forces incorporating digital techniques as a means to enforce troop loyalty and maintain their control over the country? Akin Unver, an associate professor of international relations at Turkey's Ozian University, argues that economic considerations rather than geopolitical or ideological preferences are more relevant in determining whether countries will source artificial intelligence technologies from China or from democratic states. Afef Abrugui, affiliated with the Social Media Exchange, wrote about the adoption by Gulf Cooperation Council's, countries of a wide range of repressive measures. She emphasized that high-tech tools not only supported their political objectives, but were also crucial for future economic growth. Jan Ridzek, affiliated with the Ranking Digital Rights group described that the increased use of internet shutdowns to suppress dissent and block communications, right, was critical to their ability during the pandemic, of course, to maintain control over society. And the warning is that the government disdain for international human rights principles was pushing resistance to the breaking point. Okay, Sarah Gordon, a research assistant at Carnegie, profiled how Myanmar's military was spreading online propaganda to reinforce troop loyalty, identify dissent, and isolate soldiers from the outside world. Okay, let's tackle, of course, problems of disinformation, because disinformation has become the tool of choice for many liberal regimes, such as those in Brazil, Hungary, and the Philippines, and here in the United States. Okay, they seek to manipulate public opinion to remain in power, but are wary of instituting harder-edged repressive methods. In liberal democracies, you see, the threat of disinformation increasingly stems from extreme political movements, particularly far left groups, which harness social media to propagate falsehoods, spread conspiracy theories, and foment polarization and identity politics. All right, this is based upon research. Okay, not to say that the right doesn't do it too, though. I think it's everybody's doing it. It doesn't make it right. Disinformation strategies involve common tactics, right? Disseminate false narratives, whether pro-government propaganda, anti-vaccine conspiracies, or stop the steal election claims, or flood social media channels with competing or distracting information that overwhelms legitimate information sources. By labeling it hate, for instance, hate speech, when it's not hate speech, right? Because then people are they're going to have a bias towards not listening to it then if somebody says it's racist or hate speech, right? When in fact, it actually could be legitimate information to inform the public, right? But my point is, by putting a label on it, right, it encourages a biases where people are just not going to take what could be truth actually seriously. Okay, where deliberately posting offensive content online to provoke or disrupt conversations that happened during the Israel-Hamas war, right? In response to the deluge of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, governments have started cracking down on platforms, requiring companies to remove unacceptable content faster, like in areas of Scotland and Ireland and the UK, and the United States. Some governments, such as India's, only give platforms 24 hours to remove manifestly unlawful content. And the EU has adopted an even stricter rule for terrorist content. Platforms have 1 hour to remove offensive material under their laws and provisions. Many countries have also weakened or discarded intermediate liability protections for platforms. And this is an understandable reaction in liberal democracies reeling from false and polarizing content. However, more cynical autocratic regimes have seized upon the opening this trend presents and classified, of course, any content critical of their agenda as fake news and subject to removal, right? When in fact it could be the truth, okay? So you don't even know what's true or false anymore. A bigger question is how much government should hold platforms responsible for facilitating the spread of bad information. The evidence is murky, particularly in liberal democracies, about whether the surge in polarizing content is primarily a consequence of social media. While platforms provide useful targets for regulators eager to make a dent in disinformation, new research, though, indicates that false information spreads due to a complex interaction between them and mainstream media outlets. And it is insufficient to blame Facebook or Twitter's poor leadership for the much more complicated proliferation of politically motivated falsehoods, right? Agustina Del Campo, who heads the Center for Studies on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information at the University of Palermo in Argentina, contends in her contribution that policymakers have been too quick to label disinformation as a new category of social harm, discarding prior consensus about what constitutes legal speech. Okay, and she argued that the very notion of distinguishing and taking down disinformation is premised on the shaky assumption that a single authoritative source exists against which all information can be assessed for the truth. Okay, and if you notice, that's the way AI too. If you notice ChatGPT, if you notice even Google formats, if you notice a lot of, you go to DuckDuckGo and a lot of other ones, there it's unbiased. If you go to Google right now and you Google something, it's got a very biased response to your search criteria. Okay, so even that has been utilized, right, to spread disinformation and propaganda, right? on behalf of the government, and of course corporations that desire to take hold on that and control the very narrative in which we all are trying to navigate through what's truth and fiction, right? So the growing levels of disinformation and hate speech targeted against, let's just say, Asian American and Pacific Islander communities in the United States also reached a fever pitch, right? And it's still going on. It just depends on whatever sensationalized, narrative that any media wants to push to get a few clicks and, of course, followers and views, right? Because it's all about views. They don't really care about whether or not it's truth or fiction. Okay. Let's talk about some case studies from two influential countries, India and Indonesia. Okay, as two of the world's largest democracies, both have experienced an illiberal resurgence in recent years. And they represent crucial areas of struggle when it comes to determining whether information and communication technologies can enhance good governance or whether they will intensify polarization, identity politics, and autocratic control. Arindendra Basu, a researcher in India's Center for Internet and Society, emphasizes the importance for democracies like India to facilitate uncomfortable conversations around the rule of law and human rights at home in order to geopolitically compete against its autocratic adversaries. Sinta Dewi Rosadi, a scholar at Pajajaran University in Indonesia, scrutinized digital privacy in that country. She observed that Indonesia's patchwork of regulations related to surveillance and data privacy has frequently resulted in the denial of transparency and due process to Indonesian citizens. And this has happened here in the States. So don't think this is good, it's just somewhere else. This has actually happened in the United States. Okay, here at home. Okay, and in a lot of Western civilizations, it has poured over Australia, Scotland, Ireland, Canada, right? We're all seeing these repressive, authoritarian type of use and technology, okay, to repress, people's rights, right? And over time, it is becoming commonplace, and it's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay, right? That's why you really need to know the Constitution, U.S. Constitution, okay? Now, understand that technology wasn't available back when the U.S. Constitution was written, but that's why you need to talk to your congressmen and women about the legislation that they are writing in support of our freedoms and rights, right? Utilizing social media, also the anti-bullying laws, right, that need to be enforced. I find that how are we going to try to enforce anti-bullying laws with children when in fact adults are the worst proprietors of hateful information to each other, right? You post something and somebody just comes right at you, calls you whatever, or whatever. It's just really bad and really unhealthy environment on social media. So look, these varying global perspectives shed light on emerging areas of contestation and highlight the complexities, urgencies, and dangers involved in the advance of digital technologies and their effects on politics globally. Okay, I'm a huge proponent of technology, right? I love it. I'm a cybersecurity expert, right? And all that. I love technology, okay? But I also understand that there are effects on politics globally. It is how people use it, right? It's just like a weapon. You can't blame the weapon, right? You blame the people using the weapon, right? Like guns, the gun violence. It's not the gun's fault. The gun's just sitting there. If it wasn't a gun, it'd be a knife. If it's a knife, it'd be a rock, right? Cain smote Abel with a rock. Or his own hands, for instance, right? When guns weren't even available back then, but murder still happened, right? And in Canada, where they have restrictive gun laws, right? When I was up there, when I was traveling from the United States to Alaska, for instance, I had to go through, 4 different provinces in Canada, right? I had to cross through Canada to drive through to get to Alaska. And when I was there, of course, I didn't hear anybody getting shot by a gun. What I heard, though, was a lot of stabbings. So take away the gun itself, there's still going to be a weapon, and it's just whatever weapon of choice, right? Somebody wants to strangle somebody with their hands or with a rope or with, pantyhose or whatever, I'm just saying, it's whatever the weapon of choice. It's the person behind the weapon. Similarly, right, technology can only be used as a weapon if, in fact, the citizens and government allow it to be, okay? And that's what's going on. It's being weaponized. Okay? Technology can be very good, but it can also be very bad if, in fact, it's weaponized. And in this case, it's definitely being weaponized in politics, in elections, right? In surveillance, right? All that. Look, the hope is that contributions of many of these, agencies that I've discussed today will help policymakers connect local perspectives with global concerns. And that will hopefully bridge the research gap between international conversations taking place in capitals and local realities on the ground that are driving specific trends. Okay, so hopefully over time, we can expect the network to generate new ideas that will influence relevant policy conversations, whether coming up with innovative approaches to strengthening digital safeguards, offering new regulatory models for responsive governance of emerging technologies, or confronting concerning politics, related any pandemic crisis for that matter, because that was just the beginning, right? So and there's been pandemics in the past, right? This isn't the first pandemic, okay? It's just the first one where technology was heavily utilized to control people, right? Keep people at home, quarantine people and all that, and track people's movements, okay? And of course, that's opened up a whole nother dialogue concerning the potential for autocratic use of technology, right? And again, it's happening here in the United States too. We have the United States Constitution, okay? Our Declaration of Independence, our Bill of Rights, right? And if you don't know, if you're not a proponent of civics, okay? If you're not a proponent of, U.S. history, because even U.S. history has been skewed, they're changing it as we speak. They're changing history. Some for the good, some for the bad, right? And again, there's just so much propaganda, and propaganda is being taught at school. Look, in the technology realm, okay, where I am best suited, right, where I reside, where my entire life has been in, basically, is in technology. And my passion for technology, education, cybersecurity, right, AI, I'm a U.S. Army veteran and all that. But you need to have strong, math skills. Math is not racist. I don't know how that is. 2 + 2 is 4. How is that racist? Just saying, it's not racist. And what it does, though, is it actually then, if you tell a kid math is racist, then a kid's not going to learn math. That very math, right, is math needed to, for instance, create algorithms, on the back end of AI and machine learning. Digital currency, for instance, that's all on the back end. It's code, it's algorithms, right? Even building a house requires, understanding, geometry and a variety of things. So you're holding these kids back by not teaching them, math and critical thinking, and on all that. That is really required for them to survive, right? What you're creating are activists where they don't even know. If you ask a kid right now, what are you in protesting? They don't even know. They just get a hold of a trending thing and it's like, okay, then they get on TikTok about it. They have no idea what they're even protesting about. So, not at all. They just go with whatever's, popular, right? It's the Kim Kardashian effect, really, honestly, right? Because whatever, remember the Kardashians, right? Whatever they said, oh, everybody would follow, It's like that. Whatever's trending, somebody gets on. If everybody says, oh, wear red, everybody's going to wear red. If somebody says, wear blue, everybody's going to wear blue, right? So nobody's even knowing what the root cause of even the problem is and what really they stand for, But again, you have to deduce for yourself what's going on, right? And unfortunately, technology has been weaponized against our youth, against proper education, honestly, against, any political dissidents, right? Against citizens of the country, So it's definitely very, very concerning. And so anyways, this concludes some analyses on issues that, are being witnessed on the front lines of technology and, of course, politics, right? And how technology is being weaponized against us all globally. And it's something that we need to start working with our congressmen and women to. And again, hire, when you are electing people, most of the congressmen and women, like if you have something, just like if you're going through a divorce, right? You're not going to just hire somebody off the street to represent you, right? With no law background, especially in the area of divorce, custody, and all that, right? or if it's concerning human rights, right? You want a rights lawyer, right? If you are actually, electing people in Congress that have no background in law and they're writing law, that's a problem. Don't you agree? You should have a background in law if you're going to be a congressman or woman, right? Because they're writing the very legislation at the federal level that affects us all in technology, everything, human rights, all of it, right? So, but if you've never taken civics class because it's racist, or you've never taken math because it's deemed racist, right? There's a problem. What that does is it holds all of our kids that should have an equal education, should be a right, not a privilege. Quality education should be a right, not a privilege, right? There's nothing racist about math. What you're doing basically, you're racist for saying math is racist. Because if you say that, okay, if math is racist, what you're saying that anybody that you deem less than you, right, in disadvantaged communities, if that's the way you think, then you think that they don't even have the intellect, to even figure out math problems. That makes you racist for saying that math is racist, right? So again, it just makes no sense. There's just no common sense anymore, right? And what they've done is they've turned all of our kids into activists. And even just stuff that they don't even know what they're what they're protesting about. That's just the dumbest thing in the world, if you will. Turning our malleable kids' brains into just silly putty that they can just manipulate. Okay, I mean their frontal lobes aren't even fully developed until they're 25, and yet they're asking kids to make important decisions about themselves, right? Not including parents, right? Parents aren't even involved in the equation anymore. Okay. So government is completely taken hold, and they're using technology, all of it, medical technology, education technology, political technology. They've weaponized it all, folks. And these large corporations too are all they care about is, again, if you got the money, you're going to make a lot of these decisions, and they're in these politicians' back pockets as well. So be very careful, right? Be very careful. Let's try to talk to our congressmen and women, right, and make change for the betterment of the future of humanity. Okay. I mean, even in environmental tech, people don't realize that when you're promoting, let's just say EVs, which I'm for the environment too. I mean, obviously, that's another reason why I moved to Alaska too, because I wanted to get closer to nature out here and all that. I mean, obviously, I'm not living off the grid or anything like that, but, because what I do is all about technology and all that, but I'm able to go out and take walks and really be closer to, the environment, the wilderness and animals and everything, right? So I'm a huge proponent for the environment, right? But I also know there's a common sense approach that comes into that. So when you are creating an EV, right, it's still going to require, copper, for instance, lithium, and all these things, which if you look at the supply chain, you've got child labor, slave labor, you've got all of that. And there's not enough copper anyways to go around, in the world to actually build these electronic vehicles, right? And, what about, and even like I said, gasoline, right? So if you look at petroleum, it's used in a lot of products today. I don't think people realize what they're doing. They're removing one thing and replacing it with a larger problem. Okay, that's going to have a larger dependency and a worse impact on the environment. So again, technology can be good or bad. It's just the people that are utilizing it. And if you have a bad person utilizing technology, obviously they're going to turn it into something that is evil and maniacal. Okay. If you have a good person using technology, it goes without saying, right? But I think there needs to be a lot more discussion, but more on the common sense approach, okay? And not just a few cherry-picked people also that just have the same bias you have, but where you're listening to everybody's opinions and research, right? And listen to the science, the actual science, not just cherry-picked science based upon research that you've paid for, right, to come up with a biased opinion, okay? Science should be objective. It either is or that's why I like cybersecurity and technology, because it either is or it isn't, right? It either is a finding or it's not a finding. You know what I mean? And so that's why I like that, because there's nothing you can counter with that. It's the truth is the truth is the truth. The fact. I'm all about fact, because everybody has their own truth, right? I can have a truth. You can have a truth. We can have an argument, right? We have our own basically opinions about the argument, which are our own equal truth, our own version of the events. That's why they call it his, hers, and then what really happened, right? The objective viewpoint, right? Of what really happened. Okay. So anyways, with that said, let's work with our politicians to not weaponize technology against us, not weaponize political dissidents, right? If somebody has a difference of opinion from you, hear them out. Sometimes it's education. Hear them out, right? They actually could be correct. Sometimes it's the truth. The truth hurts sometimes. Sometimes you don't want to hear the truth because it's something you're hearing trending. You think, okay, just because 90,000 people think the same way, that doesn't mean it's right either, right? So again, do your own critical thinking, your analyses from a multitude of sources. Like when I look at sources, I look at left sources, I look at right sources, I look at independence, I look at a lot of independent sources. But there's a lot of bias stuff out, a lot of biases out there, whether you like it or not. And they're just going to paint a picture in a certain light because that's what they're promoting, right? Whatever narrative or agenda. But you have to see between the BS, right? You have to look between the BS and, deduce for yourself what is fact, okay? And what is fiction. And it's unfortunate it's come to that, okay? But it is what it is. And teach your children to do the same, to be critical thinkers, right? And it's okay to go against a narrative, especially the narrative just might be wrong. It's okay to go against the narrative, right? So, you don't have to be sheep and follow everybody's whatever trending, thing, that just makes you a sheep. If everybody says, okay, yeah, jumping off the cliff is the right thing to do, you're going to do it. A lot of people actually right now would. If there was a TikTok thing or something that was put out saying, oh, the new TikTok, trending, competition or whatever that, game that they put out. The kids, no joke, would be teeter-tottering on the side of a cliff trying to take a picture, and we have a bunch of kids dying off the side of a cliff. Because that's how dumbed down we've become in society. It's all about the popular opinion, not about the factual one. Okay? Not about the factual one. So, all right, so this concludes my analyses and this podcast episode on issues that we are seeing on the front lines of politics and technology, right, and in this world as a whole. And let's work together to better inform our, politicians and our kids and society, on utilizing authoritative sources and not becoming authoritarian in their approach just because somebody thinks differently from them, and then weaponize technology against people that have a difference of opinion or difference of religion or different political affiliation, right? Whether you're the Democrat or Republican, right? So, just take heed and, again, do your own research. Do your own research, okay? And again, don't even listen to me. You don't even have to listen to me. Go do your own research. That's what this is for. It's to provide a conversation that will hopefully incite some thought behind it, right? Thought, so you can do your own analyses on what's truth or fiction, what's fact or fiction. Okay, so with that said, this is Anna London with Cyvergence, okay? Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or anything like that. Continue to, support each other, okay? Continue to help each other, okay? And stop cyberbullying. If we're going to, like I said, promote anti-bullying with our kids, then we need to also set the example. And I don't see many adults setting the example in that regard. So, take note of that too, because what you're doing then is weaponizing cyberbullying or weaponizing technology against the fellow human, okay? Which eventually we're going to become extinct because everybody's mad at each other, right? An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, especially if you don't even know whether or not you are, if you're not independent in thought, then you might as well just, be a sheep and be controlled, honestly. So anyways, use technology for good. How about that? Let's use technology for good. Let's stop, using it for authoritative sources. And if you find it's being used, then you need to report it. And if you report it, you shouldn't be, You should not be charged with anything or jailed just because you have a difference of opinion. I mean, give me a break. All right, with that said, this is Anna London with Cyvergence signing out.